But yeah. Of course it can be done. Everything can be done. Suicide by Proxy by Katrina Gulliver, and this is actually in JSTOR Daily. So, what's that? Oh, I went live. Yeah. Don't you, Socrates? Well, we'll find out what it thinks a snub nose is. Yeah. But yeah, let's commit to the suicide paper. We'll read this now. Well, it's short. For Christians, suicide has traditionally been regarded as a sin. This confronts would-be suicides with the dilemma, suffering the kind of depression that offers no hope, yet fearing they face eternity in hell. The Hegel version? Yeah. I don't think Hegel was that good looking either. I forget, though. No, he was not. At least I've only seen him as an old guy. Alright, so some in early modern Europe found an ingenious and horrific solution. The penalty for murder was execution, so they would commit murder in order to be executed. Oh, so this is like the nowadays death by cop. Like, because people want, if they want to die, they go attack cops, and then they get shot here in the U.S. So it's like suicide by cop, they call it here in the States. Historian Kathy Stewart terms this suicide by proxy, and her research uncovered a pattern of such cases in the Holy Roman Empire between 1612 and 1839. Okay, so interesting. So this was suicide by death penalty, because death penalty was the penalty for murder, so they were killing people in order to get themselves murdered or get themselves executed by the state. In the justice system of early modern Europe, public executions offered a spectacle of both punishment and penitence. The condemned received the ministrations of a priest and had the opportunity to repent and receive absolution. For the suicide by proxy, this was the perfect outcome. Oh, fascinating, because you were guaranteed the priest at the end. Yeah, well, that's a good question, Ivan. I thought murder was a mortal sin, but like, this is interesting. They say right here that you can get absolution. Let's see, can I get this bigger? Not really. Okay. For the suicide by proxy, this was a perfect outcome. They would sacrifice a child, often by slitting its throat. Oh my God. A symbolic act in the tradition of blood sacrifice, also echoing the beheading of the murderer. The beheading the murderer would receive, and they could still be forgiven before their deaths. The murderers sometimes explained their choice. By killing an innocent, they could be sure their victim was going to salvation. So you didn't kill someone older because maybe they would go to hell but could have redeemed themselves. So you kill an innocent. In this version of Christianity, I guess it wasn't mortal, and then you also get absolution by feeling bad about it and being penitent right before your death. So you can still repent for murder but not suicide. Interesting. I'm not theologically up on all this stuff. All sins are forgivable to the repentant confessed in that tradition. Fascinating. So you can get, well, I'm not so surprised about this, but I just don't know the facts in the matter, because it's always the like serious murderers that like are always praying, because they get away with it for whatever reason. Okay, so Stewart's research showed that this practice to be more prevalent among Protestants than Catholics and more common among women than men. But in seeking absolution before death, Protestant suicides by proxy were pursuing a Catholic goal. As Stewart notes, more than 2 centuries after Luther, the clergy was still struggling to inculcate the doctrine of salvation by grace alone. Interesting, yeah. So yeah, the idea was like, it's not the priest that gives you salvation. It's like the Lord above that comes down, that grants salvation, but not the priest. Priests and leaders of both confessions struggled with how to address these crimes. Lutheranism took a more ambivalent view to suicide than Catholicism, so tended to be more vocal in their condemnation. Catholics faced more of a quandary. Quote, Catholic theologians believed, after all, that Christians were obligated to do penitence to expiate their sins, though for sinners to orchestrate their own execution was hardly what they had in mind. Yeah, I mean, you have to do something about it. A lot of things like, God will help you if you act. But of course, they were not expecting you to commit murder to fix your problem. Meanwhile, secular authorities also had a challenge in responding to this class of crime. The penalty for homicide was death, but they did not want to incentivize such would-be suicides. Some states introduced more horrific punishment for suicides by proxy, like death by impalement rather than beheading. Wow. Okay. Yeah, I mean, this is the old you can't profit from your crime in the United States. Like, if you did something and you're trying to sell a book talking about your crime, you can't make any of the money selling books describing your criminal act. In the states of Schleswig and Holstein went the other way, specifying in 1767 that those who killed with the intention of ending their own life would not receive death, but would instead be sentenced to hard labor for life, in addition to branding, public whipping, and being paraded around annually in chains on a market day while wearing a sign describing their crime. Prussia also issued an edict in 1794 that those who committed murder with the intention of being executed should not achieve their goal, but receive life imprisonment with regular whipping. Yeah, so this is the thing. Exactly, they had to up the punishment since people wanted to die. They could not give them absolution and death. They had to, make it an extended game of like, you had to continually get punished for this. The phenomenon of suicide by proxy faded away by the mid-19th century, but Stewart's study teaches us both how common people understood their faith in salvation and how they could turn the justice system against itself for their own ends. Yeah, Vipers is excited about this. I mean, normally you have to pay a lot of money for that, but if the government's willing to do it for free. Now, nowadays, we have this all the time, actually. People will rob banks for small amounts of money because it guarantees them a bed and 3 meals a day or whatever, and like healthcare. Like, if you're in jail, you get some healthcare. In the United States, you might not have easy access to healthcare, but if you walk into a federal bank and stick it up, you're going to federal prison. And I'm not saying you want to be in federal prison, but it might be better off than living on the street. So yeah. Oh, Evolve Yourself. How you been? What's going on? Evolve Yourself TV is a fellow streamer. What's going on, my friend? Let's give Evolve Yourself a shout out. Evolve Yourself does, he's a philosopher, first of all. Does mind, metaphysics, philosophy of science. And on his stream, he talks philosophy sometimes, but he's a chess instructor, does chess content, and does meditation, which is a lot of his content. So, like, I'm kind of focused. I talk philosophy, like, pretty hardcore philosophy, but, like, on his stream, he's doing more balanced stuff. You get a more well-rounded thing. So, we were just discussing here that in the the 1600s to the mid-1800s, people would, instead of, like, how we have suicide by cop here, they would suicide by murder, because in their religion, you could get absolution. And so you would then, instead of killing yourself, which there's no redeeming yourself for suicide, but if you murdered, you could then still be redeemed and you'd get the death penalty. So you'd be killing yourself and would receive absolution before death. So it's like, that's interesting, because the payoffs for murder became higher than the payoffs for, trying to get help. Yeah, super fascinating. Thank you to Cinesemiotics again for suggesting this. And you're right. It's like, this is sort of like how do you actually measure the payoffs here? So, and then we also had this other one from Cinesemiotics, which we might get to. Chess, unlike war, is a game of perfect information. And I was mentioning there is fog of war chess. Like, fog of war chess is fascinating. Yeah, and I was also saying, in the United States, because of our shitty healthcare system, people rob banks so that they can go to jail, like white-collar jails, because you get food, a bed, and healthcare. I don't know if it's the best healthcare in jail, but you get some healthcare. And so a lot of people who are old, I've heard about this in Japan too. Like, if you are old and destitute in Japan, you might rob a bank, because basically a jail for an old person is kind of like a retirement home. And so it becomes incentivized to do crimes when the benefits of being incarcerated are higher than the benefits of not being incarcerated. And so we've got problems like that. And I think the Japanese also have problems like that. For people who have very low resources, being in jail there is much nicer than being poor and old. So yeah. And yeah, like I was saying, we also have death by cop here in the U.S. If you want to die, you can just attack a cop and they will shoot you. Evolve Yourself says a lot of heroin addicts who want to quit commit crimes so that they can go to jail and get sober. Oh, and yeah. Oh, that's a good example. I've heard about that before, and a few guys that have done such things. Yeah, because it guarantees you harder access to drugs if you are institutionalized. And if you don't have healthcare in the United States, you might not have access to, something that will like a medical program that will take you. But why not just go to jail if you're already, if you've been to jail before, like it's not going to really mess up the rest of your life, but being sober will help you. That may be a solution. And see, this is a terrible use of the way our resources are allocated. We should not be getting people to go to jail to solve these social problems. But this is what we do because this is how people, as Sensemiax was pointing out, it becomes incentivized to do these criminal acts because there are societal aspects that we've made to make the punishment actually have certain benefits too. Sensemiax says, withdrawing from heroin on the floor of a cold jail cell is, I've heard firsthand from a friend, the most awful experience she ever had in her life. I believe it. I mean, that sounds absolutely terrible. But, oh my God. So this is actually an image of a lady murdering a child, like by strangulation in order that she will get beheaded. Like, this is like one of the creepiest things you can like look at. This is really, really, really creepy. Like up here in the upper right corner, this is her strangling the child. This is a picture of a dead baby, a strangled baby, and then her waiting to be beheaded over here. This is terrible. Ivanio says, single-payer healthcare is so difficult that it has only been accomplished by 33 out of 34 Western democracies. I know. It's like, you can't like ever expect to get like all of them. Like, that's crazy talk. Yeah, sounds awful. Oh man. So, and that was they're saying, and on top of it, you had to murder someone innocent to guarantee they were going to heaven, so you weren't like depriving someone of the opportunity to redeem themselves. So you had to murder an innocent person, so they murdered kids. This is like nuts. But the UK is working on undoing it. Hey, Unreal Brian. Tommy. Hey, Tommy. What's up? Welcome in. Seems a little extreme, like maybe go for a registered sex offender first, not a child. They didn't. I doubt they had sex offenders in the 200 years ago when this was going on. But even so, if you are theological, you assume that, like, if you're religious, you assume the child's going to heaven. So you're not actually, you're depriving them of a full life, but you're not depriving them of any, like, real infinite pleasure. Like, they're going to be in heaven, so they'll be okay. You're sort of depriving their family and stuff. But, like, if in the theological worldview, they're not really being deprived. And I guess killing a sex offender, again, that person may have been able to be redeemed at a certain point. They've been undoing it for 40 years. Oh, the single payer? Yeah, I mean, they've got problems. In like Canada, I've heard things. They've been trying to undo it, but like everyone's like, don't undo it. Yeah, exactly, Tom. But if you need an innocent person, that rules them out. That's the idea. You don't want to take away someone's opportunity for redemption. Is the thought here. Now, it makes it all the worse, but like that is the thought. Frank Big Time says you could kidnap the sex offender, tell them you are going to murder them, and then offer them absolution before you do. I mean, you'd have to be a priest to offer absolution, and they discussed that briefly in the article, that really it's not the priest that offers absolution. You have to be penitent, and then God gives you absolution. But, yeah, I mean, I don't know how hard it is to become a priest. Maybe you can just become a priest and do that. Yeah. Interesting article. Very interesting. But let's go. Let's see. What time is it? We've got plenty of time.